Steven Levy, the author of In the Plex and a senior writer on Wired magazine. Steven, how does Google shape our lives?
We interact with Google, pretty much everyone I know, and I'll bet everyone you know, interacts with Google multiple times a day in various different ways. Pretty much everyone uses the search engine. A lot of people use their other products, the Gmail and increasingly the documents. YouTube is by far the dominant video franchise on the web. It's the second biggest search engine. So by using these products and being able to do things that we couldn't have done before, it changes our behavior. Google actually changed the web. By making things easier to find from its search engine, people created websites that wouldn't have been created otherwise because no one would have found them.
Shiva Vaidyanathan from the University of Virginia has written an interesting book which probably should be written with yours. He thinks that Google has too much power over us. Would you agree with him?
In some aspects, Google has a lot of power. We have to trust it a lot, whether we like it or not, really, because of the information they have about us. Too much power is a tough decision to say. Certainly, they have a hell of a lot of power, and we have to trust them a hell of a lot, not to abuse that power.
Do you trust them?
I do, actually. It's interesting. So I noticed my own behavior when I was doing the book. I sometimes would talk to people off the record who weren't people at Google there. And I would ask myself, gee, should I send my transcriber this tape over Gmail? And sometimes, maybe just because of a little extra due diligence, maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But I trusted Google enough to, when my manuscript was being written and sent back and forth to the publisher, I trusted that there wouldn't be someone at Google saying, here's this guy who's writing a book about us, take a look at it. So I actually, maybe I'm naive, but I trusted them to the extent that I thought, I'm pretty certain that wouldn't happen. They wouldn't violate their principles to that degree.
Why do you think they trusted you so much? I'm guessing if I wanted to write a book like that, they wouldn't give me the kind of access that you got.
Well, you have to ask to find out, don't you?
I will. Are you watching, Google?
I had a long relationship with Google. I mentioned them first in Newsweek, where I worked before Wired, in February 1999 in a column. It was one of the first mentions they had in a national magazine. I wrote cover stories about them for Newsweek. I spent a lot of time. They felt that I got it, which was good. I'd agree with them. And by the time I was ready to write a book, I think I was in a good position, and it was a good time too, to ask for this kind of access.
It's a great book, but one criticism perhaps, but one criticism I might have is that you do seem sometimes a little in love with Google's culture. Why? What's so great about jumping around on these beanballs and dressing up in fancy uniforms? Why did you find that so attractive?
Well, in love is your characterization.
Infatuated.
I'm impressed by it. Let's say this.
Why?
I think it's an interesting experiment to say, let's treat our employees, particularly in Google's case, the engineers, like royalty, and see if we get paid back by increased productivity, more creativity, things like that. When I was working on this book, actually before the book, I was doing Google stories and learning about this culture. It was in the mid-2000s, and I was working in Newsweek, and Newsweek was having its struggles. And Newsweek actually had, for journalism, a pretty posh culture, but it was pulling back there. And one thing it never had, you don't see in journalism, are the cafes like you have at Google. And we'd go up to the cafeteria there, and it was like your high school cafeteria there. They'd serve this stuff to you that you couldn't quite identify what it was. Then I go to Google and I wondered, gee, how would it work in journalism if people treated their employees like that? Would they be more loyal? Would they put in extra time? Journalism, probably not. People are crazy and they work overtime anyway. But in other areas of the economy, what would it be like if instead of treating employees like dirt, they treated them like royalties? And I think it's an interesting experiment. And I said in the book, it'll be interesting to see what happened if Google actually did hit some sort of trough where the money wasn't coming in, and whether they would still stick to that lavish number of benefits they give their employees. Food's only the beginning of it.
So you think that if Google wasn't as successful, the people who work for it would be less happy?
Well, of course they would. Anyone feels better to work for a successful company, and I think anyone works better to work for a company that values them highly.